Next Tuesday, we'll be talking a lot about this stuff, especially with regard to New Jersey. Wells Fargo's asset cap was lifted today by the Federal Reserve. It's been in place for 7 years. You saw them popping corks this morning, effectively at the New York Stock Exchange. Wells Fargo has been released from this cap that, as I mentioned, is 7 years old, having met the conditions, according to the Fed, required by an enforcement action imposed back in 2018 to remove the restriction. We wanted to talk about this, particularly ahead of our conversation with Senator Elizabeth Warren next hour, who is, by the way, not happy about this move, with Nathan Dean, who is an expert on the banking industry and, in fact, U.S. policy analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. Nathan, it's great to have you here. I don't know if you saw this coming today, but a lot of folks thought this would be lifted a long time ago. It was a unanimous decision, and it's being seen as very good news for Wells Fargo. What's your reaction?
Yeah, so I think there was some anticipation that with the Trump victory, this was going to come in 2025. The stock's up 20% since November, and that's compared to around 4 to 6% for the KBW index. So a lot of this was priced in. But I would say is that, Wells Fargo for the last 7 years has been having this hang where they can't grow beyond 1.95 trillion in terms of assets. And now there's a lot of operational flexibility. That's the word that our chief banks analyst, Allison Williams, used in her note on this, is operational flexibility. So now that they're no longer under the asset cap, Wells Fargo has the ability to go out there and grow, most likely wholesale deposits. And when you put it into comparison over those 7 years, Citigroup grew around $2 billion. And then, Bank of America grew around $1 billion in conjunction.
Pretty wild statement from Senator Elizabeth Warren. As I mentioned, she's demanding 5 years now of exam reports, Nathan, from Wells Fargo as a member of, and in fact, ranking member here of the banking committee. She says everyone here who made this decision should be embarrassed. Is she going to get those documents?
No, she's not. I'll just say that, for her to get those documents, she's going to have to really try and use every leverage point she can. And part of the frustration here from the Democratic perspective is that, Wells Fargo still had some of its issues that it had to resolve. The reason why it took so long is because for every 2 steps forward, there was another issue that put them 1 step back. But I will say here is that, the decision to lift an asset cap, that's made by Fed staff. That's not exactly a political decision. So I think what happened here is that Fed staff went to their board and said, look, we think that the Wells Fargo has met all of its MRAs and MRIAs and all the other things that they had to do to actually lift this asset cap. And we would also note is that this vote was unanimous, including Michael Barr, who up until February was the Fed vice chair for supervision. So Elizabeth Warren has probably a lot of anger on this, but, I think a lot of it was also directed at the wrong folks.
Well, she's been talking about repeated violations, saying it is stunning in a statement that the Fed could not wait until the company went even a full year without breaking the law before wiping its slate clean. She's talking about violations flagged, Nathan, by the SEC in January, by the CFPB 6 months ago, by the Comptroller of the Currency last September. Is she wrong about that stuff?
So there are violations and there are violations. I mean, the amount of consent orders and enforcement actions they had thrown at the banking industry is actually somewhat common. Obviously, it's not good news for the banking industry, but there are violations out there that some banks get. But we would note is that, if you look at how Wells Fargo operated over the last 7 years, there were certainly curtails or things that moved them forward, but then there were also violations that warranted that asset cap remaining in place. Mm-hmm. But if, according to the Fed staff, it looks like they've met everything that they need to do. And in this order, there's additional steps they have to make, but it looks like this asset cap is gone for good.
Really interesting. Really glad you could join in the clutch here with a breaking story. Nathan Dean, of course, with apologies to Stumpy. If you're with us on YouTube, you know what I'm talking about. Search Bloomberg Business News Live. We'll always save a seat for you here in the studio on our YouTube feed. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Glad you came along.